A month before Dad's big dinner, he called me saying not to bring my family because some girl was bringing her boyfriend, so I ruined the entire event to prove I'm the true head of this family. Hey Reddit, I'm Tyler, 31 years old, and I need to get this story off my chest because the whole situation still keeps me up at night. Fair warning, this is going to be a long one, but please stick with me because it gets absolutely wild. I thought I was living a pretty solid life in the suburbs with my wife Jessica, who works as an accountant and is honestly a total keeper. We have our 7-year-old son Mason, and let me tell you, this kid has more energy than a Monster Energy drink factory. My father Robert also lives nearby, and we've got this decent little setup going. Nothing fancy, but it's ours, you know? I work as a mechanic and pull in decent money, so life was cruising along pretty smoothly until last year when everything went completely sideways. Before I get into the main story, let me paint you a picture of my family dynamics, because understanding this background is crucial to everything that happened next. My mother, Helen, is basically the CEO of Control Freaks Incorporated. Everything in her world has to be absolutely perfect according to her specific standards, and disagreeing with her is like trying to negotiate with a brick wall that's having a bad day. My father, Robert, is a carpenter by trade, a quiet type who tends to keep his head down and just rolls with whatever decisions my mother makes. It's a dynamic that's been going on for decades, and honestly, I never really questioned it growing up. Then there's my sister Brianna, who's 22 years old and 9 years younger than me. She's been the golden child since day one, which I guess makes sense given the age gap. I also need to mention my cousin Kevin, who's 27 and basically like Mason's uncle. Kevin works in tech, has absolutely zero filter when it comes to family drama, and always calls things exactly like he sees them. Mason absolutely adores him because Kevin treats him like a little buddy instead of just another kid to pat on the head. When I told Kevin about our family dynamics years ago, his response was classic Kevin. So, your mom's a control freak, your sister's spoiled rotten, and your dad's been playing dead for 25 years? Sounds like a Netflix series waiting to happen. At the time, I laughed it off. But looking back now, his assessment was pretty spot on. Here's the thing that might surprise people. Growing up, I never felt particularly bitter about Brianna being the obvious favorite. She was 9 years younger than me, so it made perfect sense that she'd get extra attention and special treatment. Plus, I genuinely loved having a little sister to look out for and protect. Call me naive, but I honestly thought that protective big brother energy would naturally translate into my parents showing the same kind of love and attention to my son. I figured having a grandchild would soften some of those hard edges and bring us all closer together as a family. Boy, was I wrong about that. The catalyst for this entire mess started about a week before my mother's retirement party. She called me up, completely excited and bubbling over with enthusiasm about throwing this big celebration. She was talking about inviting friends, relatives, neighbors, basically the whole 9 yards. I'm sitting there listening to her go on about all the planning, and honestly, I was thinking this sounded awesome. Finally, a chance for our family to come together and celebrate something positive, you know? Without even thinking twice about it, I offered to drop $900 to help make the party special. I mean, this was my mother's retirement after 30 years of hard work, and I wanted to contribute to making it memorable. When I made the offer, my mother got all emotional, thanking me profusely and telling me that we needed to come early to help with the setup. Everything seemed absolutely perfect at that point. Mason was completely pumped about the party. This kid spent the entire week working on this handmade retirement card for his grandmother. Picture this: crooked letters written in colored pencils, saying "Happy Retirement Grandma," with little flowers that he colored in himself. The whole time he was working on it, he kept telling Jessica and me that we could only give advice. But he was doing everything himself because he wanted it to be his special gift. Watching this 7-year-old pour his heart and soul into making something special for his grandmother, man, that really hit me right in the feels. I kept sitting there imagining my mother's face when she would see that card. I could picture Mason beaming with pride when she would hug him tight and tell him how beautiful and thoughtful his gift was. In my head, this was going to be one of those perfect family moments that you remember forever. The kind of memory that gets passed down through generations. Then my phone buzzed with a text message that completely changed everything. I was at work, halfway through fixing some brake lines on this Honda Civic, when I saw my mother's name pop up on my screen. I figured it was just party updates, or maybe she was asking if we could bring something specific to the celebration. Instead, I read the most shocking message I could have ever imagined. Don't come. Brianna's bringing her boyfriend and doesn't want Mason or Jessica there. Too much drama potential, no joke. My hands literally started shaking as I read those words over and over again. I sat there in the garage, staring at my phone screen, thinking there had to be some kind of terrible mistake. This couldn't possibly be real. My own mother had just told me that my 7-year-old son and my wife weren't welcome at her retirement party because my sister didn't want them there. The level of disrespect was absolutely unreal. What made it even worse was that it wasn't even a phone call or a real conversation where we could discuss it. Just a cold, impersonal text message dropping this bomb on me like I was some random acquaintance she was uninviting from a casual barbecue. I immediately tried calling her, but ring after ring, it went straight to voicemail. I called again, and the same thing happened. She was literally dodging my calls after sending that devastating message. That's when I knew with absolute certainty that this wasn't some misunderstanding or poorly worded text that could be cleared up with a simple conversation. This was completely intentional, and she was avoiding me because she knew exactly how wrong it was. I immediately called Kevin because I needed someone to talk me down from doing something incredibly stupid. As soon as I told him what had happened, he said, "Wait, let me get this straight. Aunt Helen banned a 7-year-old and your wife because Princess Brianna doesn't want them cramping her style? That's not a retirement party. That's a villain origin story." Sitting there in my work bay, surrounded by the usual garage noise of pneumatic tools and radio chatter, I felt something fundamental shift inside me. This wasn't just about a retirement party anymore. This was about respect, about family values, and about protecting my son and wife from people who clearly saw them as some kind of inconvenience rather than beloved family members. I couldn't focus on work at all after receiving that text message. My mind kept racing back to Mason, who had been talking about the party all week long. He kept asking me what kind of cake Grandma would have, whether there would be other kids there for him to play with, and if he could help serve the food. The innocent excitement in his voice made this whole situation even more heartbreaking. Around lunchtime, I said screw it and told my foreman that I needed to take the afternoon off for a family emergency, which wasn't exactly a lie, considering the circumstances. I drove the 35 minutes to my parents' house with my mind racing the entire time, trying to understand how this could have happened. Why would my mother say something so cruel and exclusionary? How could a 7-year-old kid and my wife possibly be such a problem that they needed to be banned from their own grandmother's retirement celebration? Before heading over there, I texted Kevin to let him know what I was about to do. His response was typical Kevin. "Oh, this is going to be good. Helen's about to get a reality check she can't return to customer service." I pulled into their driveway around 2 p.m. and could see my mother through the front window, just chilling on the couch and watching some daytime television program, like she hadn't just completely nuked our family relationship via text message. The sheer audacity of her casual demeanor was absolutely mind-blowing to me. As soon as I walked through the front door, she looked genuinely annoyed to see me standing there. "Why are you here? Aren't you supposed to be at work? I'm busy planning for tomorrow's party." I didn't waste any time with small talk or pleasantries. "What exactly did you text me earlier?" She immediately got that defensive look that I knew all too well, the same expression she'd worn throughout my childhood whenever she was caught doing something questionable. "I was just letting you know that Brianna's bringing her boyfriend over, and we can't have Mason running around being loud or Jessica being..." She trailed off, realizing how terrible her words sounded when spoken out loud. "Being what, Mom? Why aren't my wife and son allowed at your retirement party?" The excuse she gave me was straight up insulting and revealed everything I needed to know about how she really viewed my family. She claimed that Mason was disruptive and that Jessica was too opinionated and might say something that would embarrass the family in front of important guests. This was supposed to be a classy, elegant event, and she didn't want any incidents that might reflect poorly on her reputation. That's when Brianna walked in from the kitchen, and I could tell immediately that she'd been listening to our entire conversation. She looked at me with this incredibly smug expression and started listing off Mason's supposed crimes against the family. Being too loud during conversations, interrupting adult discussions, and spilling apple juice on their white carpet during our last visit months ago. "And Jessica always has something to say about everything," Brianna added with this incredibly bratty tone that made my blood boil. "I don't want my boyfriend thinking our family is trashy. This party is important to me too." I stood there listening to this garbage coming from the same spoiled brat whose college tuition I'd been helping pay for the past 2 years. This was the same sister I'd bought groceries for when she was stressed about money and couldn't afford to eat properly. And here she was, standing in front of me, talking about my wife and son like they were some kind of liability or embarrassment to the family name. Later that night, when I called Kevin to vent about the whole confrontation, and told him what Brianna had said about Jessica being too opinionated, he absolutely lost it. Too opinionated? That's rich coming from someone whose biggest life accomplishment is successfully spending other people's money. What's next? Is she going to complain that water is too wet? I looked directly at Brianna and asked her point blank, "So you think Mason is a bad kid and Jessica is trashy?" I wanted to hear her say it out loud, to own her ridiculous position. "Did you forget what you were like when you were his age?" I continued, my voice getting harder. Brianna rolled her eyes in that dismissive way she'd perfected since childhood, and snapped back that this situation was completely different because it was an important event, and she needed to make a good impression on her boyfriend. The entitlement in her voice was absolutely off the charts. She was discussing this like it was some kind of business meeting instead of a family celebration, where a 7-year-old should be welcomed with open arms. That's when my father Robert walked in from the garage, where he'd apparently been working on some project. My dad might be quiet most of the time, but when he's genuinely had enough of something, the man doesn't mess around. He looked straight at my mother with this disgusted expression I'd rarely seen on his face. "What the hell is wrong with you people?" he said, his voice harder and more forceful than I'd ever heard it in my entire life. "How can you possibly exclude your own grandson and daughter-in-law from a family party?" Then he turned his attention to Brianna and started systematically listing off her greatest hits from childhood, reminding everyone present of her own behavioral issues. He brought up the time she threw a massive tantrum and broke the neighbor's garden gnome when she was 8 years old. He mentioned the incident where she borrowed my mother's car at 17 without asking permission and got it towed from a no-parking zone. He reminded everyone how she used to scream and cry whenever she didn't get her way at family gatherings, making everyone uncomfortable and ruining the atmosphere for hours. "But did anyone ever ban you from family events because of that behavior?" he asked her directly. "Did anyone ever call you an embarrassment or say you weren't welcome?" Brianna just stood there with this pouty, defensive look on her face, mumbling something about how those situations were totally different and not the same thing at all. But she couldn't actually explain how they were different because, deep down, she knew my father was absolutely right. But Dad wasn't finished making his point. He told my mother that if she didn't apologize to my family right then and there and formally invite us to the retirement party, he wouldn't be attending her celebration either. The ultimatum was clear and non-negotiable. My mother's response was to start screaming about how ungrateful we all were, how she'd worked hard for 30 long years and deserved to have her retirement party exactly the way she wanted it. If I don't want certain people there causing problems, that's my right as the person being honored. But Dad stayed completely calm throughout her outburst. He reminded her that family should always come first, and that he'd spent the last 25 years watching her play favorites and treat people like decorative accessories for her perfect public image. "I'm done enabling this toxic behavior," he said with quiet conviction. "You've turned into someone I don't even recognize anymore. I'm watching my parents go at it like this for the first time in my entire life. And it suddenly hit me that this wasn't just about Mason and Jessica being excluded from the party. This was about years and years of toxic behavior that my father had been quietly enduring, probably hoping things would eventually change or improve. The confrontation I was witnessing was decades in the making. When I was getting ready to leave, completely done with the whole nightmare situation, my father followed me out to my truck in the driveway. He leaned in close and said something that has stuck with me ever since. "You don't have to take this kind of treatment anymore. It's time to stand up for your family." That drive home from my parents' house was when I made the decision that would change everything. I wasn't just going to walk away quietly and let this slide like nothing had happened. If my mother and Brianna wanted to treat my family like we were completely disposable, then they were about to find out exactly how disposable their comfortable lifestyle would be without my financial support. The ride home was incredibly intense. I'm gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles were white, my mind racing with everything that had just gone down. The blatant disrespect, the way my mother had acted like excluding my wife and son, was just some minor party planning decision that didn't warrant a real conversation. By the time I pulled into my driveway, I'd made a decision that would fundamentally change our family dynamics forever. Here's the thing that nobody talks about in these kinds of family drama situations. Sometimes being the bigger person and turning the other cheek just enables toxic behavior to continue unchecked. Sometimes you have to show people that there are real consequences for treating your family like garbage, or they'll never learn to respect boundaries. I walked into the house where Jessica was helping Mason with some homework at the kitchen table. My kid looked up at me with this huge, innocent smile and asked if I was excited about Grandma's party the next day. seeing that pure excitement on his face while knowing what my mother and sister had said about him and my wife. That absolutely sealed the deal for me. After Mason went to bed that night, I sat Jessica down and told her everything that had happened. I watched her face change from initial surprise to hurt to genuine anger as I explained the text message, the confrontation at my parents' house, and the things Brianna had said about both of them. When I got to the part about them calling Mason disruptive and her too opinionated, Jessica's jaw literally dropped. "They banned both of us?" she asked, her voice getting higher with disbelief. "What the hell did we ever do to them to deserve this kind of treatment?" "Tomorrow, I want you to take Mason to that new arcade place downtown," I told her calmly. "Don't mention anything about Grandma's retirement party. Let him have fun and enjoy his day. As for me," I continued, "I've got plans." She asked me what exactly I was planning to do, and I told her straight up, "I'm going to take back what's mine." I called Kevin right after Jessica went upstairs to check on Mason. As soon as I explained my plan to him, he started laughing with genuine admiration. "Bro, you're about to repo your own family. That's some next-level petty revenge, and I am absolutely here for it. Helen's going to learn that karma doesn't send warning texts." That night, I locked myself in my home office and started making a detailed list. Not just any list, a comprehensive inventory of every single thing I'd bought for my parents over the past 6 years. I pulled up online receipts, bank transfer confirmations, warranty information, credit card statements, the whole 9 yards. I wanted to know exactly how much money I'd spent on these people who had just told me that my wife and son weren't welcome in their house. The total came to $42,000. $42,000 from a middle-class family budget, given freely and generously over the years to help my parents live more comfortably. I started documenting the big-ticket items first. There was the $950 Samsung refrigerator I'd bought when my mother's old one finally died, and she complained about not being able to keep food fresh. The $680 LG washer I'd purchased because the old one was apparently too embarrassing for her to use when neighbors might see it in the laundry room. Then there was the $1,650 sectional sofa from Ashley Furniture that I'd bought because my father had been complaining that the old couch was falling apart and hurting his back. The 55-inch TCL TV had cost me $1,100 because my mother's eyesight wasn't good enough for the smaller screen they'd been using, and she wanted to be able to see her shows clearly. I didn't just buy the TV either. I'd paid for professional mounting service and set up all their streaming subscriptions so they could watch whatever they wanted. But the real kicker, the thing that made my blood boil the most, was Brianna's college tuition. $16,000 over 2 years so she wouldn't have to work a part-time job and could focus entirely on her studies. This whole arrangement had started when she came to our house one evening, crying about how student loan interest rates were going to crush her financially. I'd originally offered to loan her the money interest-free, but Jessica had convinced me to just gift it to her instead. "You're being a good big brother," she'd said. "Family helps family." Plus all the smaller purchases that had added up over time. A dining room set, bedroom furniture, various kitchen appliances, a coffee maker, a laptop for Brianna when hers broke, and random living expenses whenever she was stressed about money and couldn't afford groceries or gas. When I really thought about it, nearly everything of value in that house had been paid for with money from our family budget. And now these same people had the absolute nerve to tell me that my family wasn't good enough to be in their presence. I found this used furniture pickup service online, one of those companies that buys decent secondhand stuff and resells it to other customers. I called them up and explained that I had a house full of furniture that I needed moved as soon as possible. They were more than happy to help, especially when I mentioned the quality and quantity of items involved. I scheduled them for the next morning at 11 a.m., right in the middle of my mother's precious retirement party, when she'd be surrounded by all her friends and neighbors. The timing wasn't accidental. The plan was elegantly simple, but devastatingly effective. I would show up during the party with a professional moving crew and systematically reclaim every single item I'd purchased over the years. Everything had receipts in my name, bank transfers to prove payment, and warranty documentation. Legally, it was still my property that I'd been graciously allowing them to use. When I texted Kevin the final details of my plan, his response had me cracking up despite the serious situation. "This is better than any Netflix series I've ever watched. You're about to turn Helen's retirement party into an episode of Repo Wars. I'm genuinely disappointed that I can't be there to watch Brianna's face when that big screen TV comes down off the wall. Was it petty? Maybe. Was it completely justified? Absolutely. I stayed up until 2 a.m. that night, organizing everything meticulously. I had addresses for the furniture service, copies of all the receipts, and a detailed list of exactly what needed to be removed from the house. This wasn't how I'd wanted things to go with my family, but they had forced my hand with their cruel and disrespectful behavior. Some people might say I should have just walked away quietly, cut contact, and been the bigger person in the situation. But here's the thing. Sometimes the bigger person approach just enables toxic people to keep being toxic without facing any real consequences for their actions. As I finally went to sleep that night, I kept thinking about Mason's retirement card sitting on his dresser, ready to give to a grandmother who had just banned him and his mother from her house. Tomorrow, she was going to learn exactly what happens when you mess with my family and treat the people I love like they're disposable. The morning of my mother's retirement party, Jessica took Mason to the new arcade just like we'd planned. My kid was absolutely thrilled about spending the day there, especially excited about trying out the laser tag arena. He was completely oblivious to the family drama that was brewing behind the scenes, which was exactly how I wanted it. At exactly 11 a.m., I pulled up to my mother's house in a white moving truck, accompanied by 2 professional guys from the furniture pickup service. These weren't just random movers, they were uniformed professionals who knew exactly what they were doing, and they'd brought all the necessary equipment for a major furniture removal job. The scene when I arrived was absolutely perfect for what I had in mind. Smooth jazz was floating out of the open windows, creating this elegant atmosphere. There were about 35 guests mingling around both inside and outside the house. Total celebration vibes, exactly what my mother had been planning for weeks. As I was walking up to the house, some relatives immediately spotted me and started with the warm, welcoming greetings. "Tyler! So glad you made it to your mother's big day," one aunt called out cheerfully. That's when my mother's sister mentioned something that made my blood boil even more. She said that Helen had told everyone that my family couldn't come because we had other commitments that we couldn't get out of. So not only had my mother banned us from the party, but she was actively lying to relatives and friends, telling them that we had chosen not to come. The lies just kept stacking up on top of each other, making this whole situation even more infuriating. My mother came out of the house looking absolutely stunning, all done up in this beautiful floral dress with her makeup applied perfectly. She was playing the gracious retiree role to perfection, accepting congratulations and compliments from her guests. As soon as she saw me approaching, she whispered urgently, "You came alone. That's good. It'll be much more comfortable this way for everyone involved." I looked her dead in the eye with complete seriousness and said, "I'm deeply disappointed in you, Mom." I watched her confident smile falter for just a brief second before she quickly forced it back on for the benefit of her guests who might be watching our interaction. That's when I made my move. I walked straight into the house with purpose, headed directly for the Bluetooth speaker that was playing that smooth jazz background music, and unplugged it without any hesitation. The sudden silence was immediate and dramatic. Every single conversation stopped mid-sentence, and all eyes turned to focus on me. You could literally feel the energy in the room shift from celebration and joy to confusion, and what the hell is happening right now? Then I pointed directly at the 55-inch TCL TV that was mounted prominently on the living room wall and told the professional movers in a clear, authoritative voice, "Take that down first." The shock that rippled through that room was absolutely immediate and palpable. You could literally feel the atmosphere change from festive celebration to complete bewilderment in a matter of seconds. Guests were looking at each other with confused expressions, trying to process what they were witnessing. My mother rushed over to where I was standing, her voice getting shrill with panic and embarrassment. "Tyler, what do you think you're doing? This is my retirement party. There are people here." "I'm taking back what belongs to me," I told her, maintaining complete calm in my voice despite the chaos I was creating. "What do you mean it belongs to you?" she demanded, her voice getting higher. "That's my TV. Everything in this house has receipts in my name, along with bank transfers to prove payment. It's legally mine, and I'm reclaiming my property." That statement shut her up immediately. She knew I was absolutely right, and there wasn't a single thing she could do about it legally. Brianna and her boyfriend, let's call him Connor, came running into the living room when they heard all the commotion and raised voices. Brianna took one look at the professional movers, carefully removing the mounted TV from the wall, and completely lost her mind. She started screaming at me to stop what I was doing, physically trying to get between me and the movers who were just doing their job. "You can't do this! This is Mom's special day! You're ruining everything!" "Step aside, Brianna," I told her firmly but calmly. No, you're being ridiculous! Do you want me to call the police? She threatened, her voice getting more hysterical by the second. Go ahead and call them, I replied without missing a beat. Let them verify who actually owns this stuff. I have all the receipts and documentation right here. Brianna's face went completely white when she realized I wasn't bluffing. She knew damn well that I had her dead to rights on this, and there wasn't a single thing she could do to stop me legally. Connor was standing there looking confused as hell, probably wondering what kind of family dysfunction he'd gotten himself involved with. The poor guy had likely thought he was just meeting his girlfriend's family at a nice retirement celebration, not witnessing a full-blown property reclamation in progress. Later, when I told Kevin about Connor's expression during all this chaos, he said, "Poor guy probably thought he was meeting the in-laws, not auditioning for an episode of Jerry Springer. I bet he's updating his dating profile as we speak. Must have normal family listed as non-negotiable." While this drama was unfolding, the guests who had come to celebrate were standing around looking incredibly uncomfortable. Some were whispering to each other, trying to figure out what was happening, and a few looked like they were ready to bolt for the door at any moment. But I stayed completely focused on my mission. Once the TV was safely loaded into the truck, I pointed the movers toward the kitchen and said, "Next is the Samsung refrigerator." That's when Aunt Eleanor, my mother's sister, stepped forward trying to play peacemaker in this increasingly tense situation. She asked me to please calm down and explain what was happening so everyone could understand the situation better. Before I could even open my mouth to respond, my mother jumped in immediately with her victim narrative. She started telling everyone how she'd made a perfectly reasonable request about the guest list for her own retirement party, and now I was being vindictive and cruel in response. But Aunt Eleanor wasn't buying my mother's version of events at all. She held up her hand to stop my mother from talking and said firmly, "Helen, stop talking for a minute and let Tyler explain his side of this." So I laid it all out for everyone in that room. I told them about the text message I'd received, explaining how my mother had banned my 7-year-old son and my wife from the party because Brianna didn't want them there. I explained how they had said Mason was too disruptive and Jessica was too opinionated, and that they would embarrass the family in front of important guests. The silence that followed my explanation was absolutely deafening. You could have heard a pin drop in that room. I pulled out my phone and showed several people the actual text message my mother had sent me, watching their faces change as they read her cold, heartless words. The warmth and affection these people had felt for my mother started evaporating in real time as they realized what kind of person she really was beneath the surface. Uncle Richard, my father's brother, was the first person to speak up after reading the message. "Helen, how could you possibly do something like that? Mason is just a little kid, and Jessica is part of this family. What were you thinking?" Then Janet, one of my mother's longtime co-workers, shook her head in genuine disappointment. "I honestly can't believe you would exclude your own daughter-in-law and grandson from your retirement party. That's just wrong on so many levels." When someone else asked Brianna directly how she could feel okay about banning a child and his mother from a family celebration, she started with all the defensive excuses. She said she was afraid Mason might be disruptive during the party, and she didn't want Jessica's comments making Connor feel uncomfortable. She needed everything to be absolutely perfect for this important day. I cut her off mid-sentence and asked the room point blank, "Would any of you feel embarrassed if Mason was a little loud, or if Jessica had opinions about things during a family gathering?" Every single person in that room said no, they wouldn't mind at all. Helen, one of my mother's neighbors, even added that she'd actually been looking forward to seeing Mason today, because kids bring such joy and energy to celebrations like this. The atmosphere in that room completely flipped after hearing everyone's responses. What had started as confusion and uncertainty turned into genuine sympathy and support for what I was doing. The guests began looking at my mother and Brianna like they were seeing them for the first time, really understanding the kind of people they were dealing with. George from down the street shook his head in disgust and told his wife they should leave immediately. "This isn't a celebration anymore," he said loud enough for everyone to hear. "This is just sad and uncomfortable." One by one, people started making their polite exits from what was supposed to be a joyous retirement celebration. They offered me words of support and understanding as they left, many of them expressing genuine concern for my family's treatment. The elegant retirement party that my mother had spent weeks planning and hundreds of dollars organizing was rapidly turning into a public humiliation that she'd never lived down. But the real shock came when Connor stepped over to Brianna with this completely serious expression on his face. The poor guy had been watching this whole family drama unfold, and you could see him processing what kind of person his girlfriend really was. Brianna, this whole situation makes me extremely uncomfortable, he said in a calm but firm voice. The way you talk about a child and his mother, I have nephews of my own, and I would never want someone treating them like this. This isn't the kind of behavior I can support or be around. Connor was clearly a decent guy who could see right through Brianna's entitled, selfish attitude. She immediately tried to explain herself, begging him to understand her perspective and why she'd felt it was necessary to exclude my family. But he was completely done with the conversation. I think we're at very different places when it comes to family values and what's important in life, he told her with finality. He gave me a respectful nod of acknowledgement and walked straight out the front door without looking back. Within about 15 minutes, that room of 35 guests had cleared out to just a handful of people. The few remaining guests were gathering their purses and car keys, clearly ready to escape this incredibly awkward situation as quickly as possible. Before leaving, Mrs. Margaret, one of my mother's oldest friends, approached her and said, "Helen, I'm genuinely disappointed in the choices you've made here. Family should always come first, especially when it comes to innocent children. I hope you can find a way to make this right." Just like that, the house was practically empty except for my mother, Brianna, the professional movers, and me. There were untouched party tables still set up with decorations, food that nobody had eaten, and the hollow echo of what was supposed to be a celebration, but had never actually happened. With all the guests gone and no more audience to perform for, I told the movers to keep going and take everything else on my detailed list. That's when my father, Robert, finally emerged from the bedroom where he'd been hiding during this entire confrontation. The guy had stayed inside the whole time, probably knowing exactly what was about to go down and not wanting to be part of the initial chaos. My mother immediately started blaming him for everything that had happened, screaming about how he could just stand there and let me steal everything from their house. She was completely hysterical at this point, her perfect retirement day in ruins. My father's response was ice cold and devastating. He bought those things with his own money. He has every legal right to take them back, he said calmly. I told you this would happen if you kept treating his family like dirt. You brought this on yourself. For the next hour and a half, I stood there and watched these professional movers systematically dismantle everything I'd paid for over the years. The Samsung refrigerator got wheeled out first, leaving a sad, empty space in the kitchen. Then came the sectional sofa that had been the centerpiece of their living room. The LG washer, the microwave, the coffee maker, piece by piece. That house was being emptied of everything that had made it comfortable and modern. My mother and Brianna just stood there the entire time, completely helpless to stop what was happening. Brianna kept crying and asking how I could possibly do this to Mom on her special day, while my mother alternated between screaming rage and this pathetic victim act where she tried to make everyone feel sorry for her. They didn't dare try to physically stop the movers because they knew I had them completely beaten legally. Every receipt, every bank transfer, every warranty document was in my name, and there wasn't a single thing they could do about it. When I texted Kevin updates throughout this entire process, his responses kept me laughing despite the serious situation I was dealing with. So they went from retirement party to estate sale in under 2 hours? That's got to be some kind of record. Helen just speed ran her way to karma. When everything was finally loaded into the moving truck, the company manager approached me with a pleasant surprise. He transferred $4,300 directly to my bank account as their payment for the used furniture they just picked up. Here I was, actually getting paid to reclaim my own property from family members who had just completely disrespected my wife and son. The irony wasn't lost on me. As the truck pulled away from the house, I turned back for one final look at what had once been my parents' comfortable home. It now stood there hollow and empty, with just bare walls and the few worn-out items that I hadn't purchased over the years. My mother was sitting on the front steps looking completely shell-shocked, like she couldn't believe what had just happened to her perfect day. Brianna was standing by the front door, crying into her phone, probably trying desperately to get Connor to come back and give her another chance. But I wasn't finished yet. There was one more thing I needed to do to complete this confrontation. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out Mason's retirement card, the one he'd spent an entire week making with those crooked colored pencil letters and carefully colored flowers. The card that represented hours of a 7-year-old's time, effort, and pure love for his grandmother. I walked over to where my mother was sitting and held the card out toward her. "This is the gift that Mason made for you," I said quietly. For just a moment, I thought maybe seeing that innocent handmade card would snap her out of her selfish mindset. Maybe she'd finally realize how incredibly wrong it was to exclude him and Jessica from the family celebration. Perhaps she'd understand what she'd thrown away and destroyed with her cruel behavior. Instead, she stood up abruptly, snatched the card from my hand, and tore it to shreds right in front of me. The pieces fluttered to the ground like confetti, but there was nothing celebratory about this moment. "Your brat and that mouthy wife of yours ruined my retirement!" She screamed at me, her face twisted with rage. "This is all their fault. Everything that happened today is because of them." Brianna immediately joined in with her own tantrum. "Yeah, and because of you, Connor broke up with me. I hope you're happy now that you've destroyed everything." Watching that precious card get destroyed, the one my 7-year-old son had made with so much love, care, and excitement, sent this sharp, painful sensation straight through my chest. But I didn't yell back at them, and I didn't lose my temper like they clearly wanted me to. Instead, I calmly bent down and started picking up every single torn piece of that card. Each scrap represented hours of Mason's time, his genuine excitement about giving his grandmother something special, and his innocent love for someone who had just literally destroyed his gift right in front of his father's eyes. I gathered every piece carefully and put them all in my jacket pocket, treating them like they were precious artifacts that needed to be preserved. When I stood up and looked directly at my mother, everything became absolutely crystal clear to me. This woman hadn't just rejected her grandson's love and thoughtfulness. She had cruelly and deliberately destroyed it right before my eyes, without a shred of remorse or understanding. "You're a pathetic excuse for a mother and grandmother," I said, looking her straight in the eye with complete conviction. For a moment, everything went completely still. My mother and Brianna both froze, seemingly unable to respond to words that probably hit harder than anything I could have physically taken from their house. I turned and started walking toward my truck without looking back, ready to leave this toxic situation behind me forever. Just as I was about to get into the driver's seat, I heard my father's voice calling out behind me. "Wait, I'm coming with you!" I turned around to see him walking out of the house with 2 packed suitcases and a manila envelope clutched in his hand. He'd clearly been preparing for this moment, probably for much longer than I'd realized. When my mother saw her husband of 30 years heading toward the gate with his belongings, she jumped up from the steps and started screaming, "Robert, you can't just leave me! Not like this!" That's when my father dropped the bomb that no one was expecting, not even me. He paused at the gate and pulled out that manila envelope I'd noticed him carrying. "Helen, you're being served with divorce papers. My lawyer will be in touch with you soon." Her face went completely white as he handed her the legal documents. You could see the shock and disbelief washing over her as she realized this wasn't just an empty threat or a moment of anger. 30 years of marriage, and this is how you treat our family, he said with quiet dignity. "I'm done enabling this toxic behavior. I'm done pretending that any of this is normal or acceptable." He kept walking toward my truck with purpose and determination. At the gate, he turned back one final time to deliver his parting words. "You and Brianna deserve each other. Maybe now, you can both learn what it's like to actually work for what you have instead of depending on other people's generosity." His words left both of them completely speechless. Brianna's mouth was hanging open like she couldn't believe what was happening to her comfortable world. The reality that her free ride was officially over seemed to be hitting her for the first time. When my father reached my truck, he looked at me with this expression I'd never seen before, a mixture of relief, determination, and hope. "You have space for your old man?" he asked quietly. My throat tightened with emotion as I realized what this moment meant. I told him he could stay with me for the rest of his life if he wanted to. In that instant, everything shifted dramatically. I wasn't alone in this fight anymore. I had my father standing beside me, the one person in my family who truly understood what family should actually mean. When I called Kevin later that evening to tell him everything that had happened, his response was absolutely priceless. "Robert served her divorce papers at her own retirement party? Your dad just went from 0 to savage in about 3.5 seconds. That's some serious final boss energy right there." That afternoon, when Jessica and Mason got back from their day at the arcade, they found me standing in our driveway with my father and his 2 suitcases. Jessica was clearly surprised by the unexpected development, but she didn't ask a bunch of questions right away. She just headed straight into the kitchen to start preparing dinner like she always did. That's one of the things I absolutely love about my wife. She has this incredible ability to read situations quickly and roll with whatever life throws at us. Mason, on the other hand, ran straight into his grandfather's arms with pure joy and excitement. The kid was absolutely thrilled to see him, and with those curious 7-year-old eyes, he asked, "Grandpa, where's Grandma?" Why did you bring bags with you? My father handled the situation perfectly, with the kind of wisdom that comes from years of experience. Grandma and I decided that I should stay here with you guys for a while. How does that sound to you? Mason nodded enthusiastically and immediately launched into animated stories about his day at the arcade. He told us all about the laser tag arena, the claw machines he'd played, and how he'd managed to beat some older kid at air hockey. His innocent excitement was exactly what we all needed after such a difficult and emotionally draining day. After Mason went to bed that night, my father asked me if I still had the pieces of the torn retirement card. I watched him sit down at our kitchen table and patiently begin putting it back together, piece by piece, like he was restoring something absolutely priceless and irreplaceable. When Jessica came out of the bedroom and saw what he was working on, she got visibly emotional. The thought of our son spending a week making that card with such love and care, only to have it destroyed so heartlessly by his own grandmother, was almost too much to process. Later that night, the three of us sat around the kitchen table, and I told Jessica absolutely everything that had happened from start to finish. After listening quietly to the entire story, she looked directly at me and said, "I'm proud of you for standing up for us the way you did. That took real courage." Then she turned to my father with genuine warmth. "Robert, you're welcome in this home for as long as you want to stay. This is your home too now." That's when it truly hit me with full force. This right here, sitting around our kitchen table with people who genuinely love and respect each other, this is my real family. These are the people who matter, who have my back, and who understand what family is supposed to be about. Over the next few weeks, my father slipped into our household rhythm like he'd always been there, as if this was where he truly belonged all along. He naturally took over the responsibility of dropping Mason off at school and picking him up each afternoon, which my son absolutely loved. During those car rides back and forth, Dad would tell Mason fascinating stories from his carpentry days and teach him basic life skills that every young man should know. My father tried multiple times to contribute money from his pension to help cover household expenses, but I shut that down immediately every time he brought it up. "Keep that money for yourself, Dad. I've got everything covered here, and you've earned the right to enjoy your retirement." What he did instead, without telling Jessica or me, was quietly open up a college savings account for Mason. One day, he casually mentioned it during dinner. "This is for my grandson's future education. He's going to need that money for school someday, and I want to make sure he has every opportunity available to him." Kevin started coming around our house much more often during this period, usually showing up on weekends to hang out with Mason and just be part of the family. My son absolutely loved having his Uncle Kevin around to play video games with and listen to his endless stream of jokes and funny observations about life. When Mason asked Kevin one day why Grandma Helen didn't visit us anymore, Kevin's response was absolutely perfect for a 7-year-old to understand. "Sometimes adults make really bad choices, buddy. But the cool thing is that you get to choose to be better than that when you grow up. You get to decide what kind of person you want to be." About a month into this new living arrangement, Dad and I were sitting on the front porch with some cold beers on a quiet evening. Mason was sound asleep upstairs, and the cool night air was setting the perfect tone for some real, honest conversation between father and son. "You know," Dad said thoughtfully, "I should have left years ago. I kept hoping that Helen would eventually change, that having a grandchild would soften her up and help her understand what really matters in life. But she just got worse and more controlling as time went on." Hearing him say that made my chest feel tight with emotion. I was finally beginning to understand just how much pain and frustration he'd endured for decades, always hoping things would get better. When I saw how they treated Mason and Jessica, how they could exclude an innocent child and your wife from a family celebration, I knew I couldn't stay quiet anymore, he continued. Filing those divorce papers felt like freedom for the first time in years. Those words hit me deeply, and for the first time in forever, our relationship felt genuinely close and authentic. We started talking more openly about work, our hopes for the future, and what we wanted Mason's childhood to look like. There was this comfortable intimacy in those conversations that hadn't been there before, like we were finally able to be ourselves with each other. This positive shift in our family dynamic affected everyone in the house. Jessica was genuinely happy to have someone else to help with Mason's daily needs and activities. Mason absolutely thrived under his grandfather's patient guidance and attention. The kid was getting the kind of male role model influence that every boy needs, and it showed in his confidence and behavior. The divorce proceedings moved forward surprisingly quickly, mainly because my father had been quietly documenting everything for months, and my mother couldn't afford a competent lawyer without his steady income to rely on. But our peaceful new life wasn't going to stay peaceful for very long. About 2 months after the retirement party disaster, the desperate phone calls started coming in with increasing frequency. First, it was Brianna blowing up my phone with increasingly pathetic and desperate messages throughout the day and night. "Tyler, I can't afford my apartment without the tuition money you were giving me," one voicemail said. "I'm going to have to drop out of school completely if you don't help me." When I didn't respond to any of her messages, they got progressively more pathetic and manipulative. "Please, I'm genuinely sorry about everything that happened. I was just trying to impress Connor and make a good impression. Can you help me with just this one semester? I promise I'll never ask for anything again." Then she escalated her tactics and started showing up at my workplace, which was completely inappropriate and unprofessional. One Tuesday afternoon, she appeared at the auto shop where I was working, crying and begging in front of all my coworkers and customers. I had to step outside with her just to avoid creating a scene that would affect my job. "I messed up, okay? I know I made a terrible mistake, but I can't afford to stay in school without your financial help," she pleaded desperately. "You can't just abandon me like this. I'm your sister." I looked her straight in the eye and told her the unfiltered truth. "You made your choice when you decided that my family wasn't good enough for your precious party. Now you need to figure out your own problems yourself." But Brianna wasn't the only one who was spiraling out of control. Through my father's divorce lawyer, we started getting updates about my mother's complete and total meltdown. It turns out that without Dad's steady income and my consistent financial support, she couldn't afford the house payments that she'd been taking for granted for years. The retirement party alone had cost her almost $2,800. Money that she didn't actually have in her budget and had put on credit cards, thinking she'd be able to pay it off gradually. Now she was calling relatives all over the place, asking for loans and financial help, while claiming that my father had stolen all their furniture and abandoned her in her time of need. Most of our extended family members knew the real story by then and weren't buying her victim narrative at all. Her sister Linda had actually called her out directly, telling her that she'd brought all of this on herself through her own terrible choices and behavior. Then my mother started showing up at places where she wasn't welcome, trying to force contact with our family. First, she appeared at Mason's school during pickup time, trying to see him and take him home with her. The school called me immediately because she wasn't on the approved pickup list, and she was causing a scene when the staff wouldn't let her take my son. I had to have a very serious conversation with the principal about keeping her away from Mason and ensuring that she understood she had no rights to access my child during school hours. Next, she showed up at Jessica's workplace, cornering her in the parking lot after work and demanding to know why we were supposedly poisoning Mason against his grandmother. She accused us of filling his head with lies and turning him against her. Jessica handled the confrontation like an absolute boss. She told my mother firmly that if she didn't leave the premises immediately, she would call building security and have her escorted off the property. Jessica doesn't take crap from anyone, which is one of the many reasons I love her. The most pathetic incident happened on a Saturday morning about 3 months after everything had gone down. I was in the garage working on my truck, just enjoying some quiet time with my tools, when I heard this commotion and raised voices outside in our driveway. I looked out to see my mother and Brianna standing there, both looking like absolute disasters. My mother had clearly been crying for hours. Her makeup was smeared, her hair was disheveled, and she looked like she hadn't slept properly in days. Brianna looked equally rough, like she'd been pulling all-nighters trying to keep up with school while working a part-time job to make ends meet. I walked outside and asked them directly what they wanted from us. "We need to talk," my mother said, her voice shaky and desperate. "This has gone on long enough. We need to work this out as a family." That's when the real begging started, and it was honestly pathetic to witness. My mother actually got down on her knees right there in my driveway, grabbing at my work boots like something out of a dramatic movie scene. "Please, Tyler, I was wrong about everything. I can see that now," she sobbed. "I'm losing the house. The bank is foreclosing next month, and I don't have anywhere else to go. I need your help." Brianna immediately jumped in with her own sob story, trying to pile on the guilt and manipulation. "I had to drop out of school completely. I'm working at a gas station now, just trying to survive. My friends won't even talk to me anymore because they think I'm a terrible person after what happened at the party." Standing there looking down at these two women who had been so arrogant and dismissive just a few months earlier, I felt absolutely nothing. No satisfaction, no pity, no sense of victory, just complete emotional emptiness. "You made your choices," I told them calmly. When you decided that my family wasn't good enough for your party, you also decided that we weren't good enough to help with your problems either. My mother started wailing dramatically about how she'd raised me from birth, how families should stick together no matter what, and how she was genuinely sorry for everything that had happened. Brianna was crying about how she'd learned her lesson and would never, ever treat Mason and Jessica badly again if I would just give her another chance. But here's the thing that really struck me about their entire performance. It was still all about them. Their problems, their needs, their regrets, their financial difficulties. Not once during this pathetic display did either of them mention how Mason had felt when his grandmother destroyed his handmade retirement card right in front of his father. Not once did they acknowledge the pain and humiliation they'd caused Jessica by excluding her from a family celebration. It was still completely self-centered, even in their moment of supposed remorse and apology. That's when my father came out of the house, having heard the commotion from inside. He took one long look at the pathetic scene unfolding in our driveway and said firmly, "Get off this property right now. You're not welcome here." "Robert, please!" my mother begged desperately, her voice breaking with emotion. "I'll do anything to fix this. I'll go to counseling. I'll change completely. I'll do whatever it takes. The house is so empty and lonely without you there." My father's response was cold and final. 30 years too late for that, Helen. The divorce will be finalized next month, and after that, you're not my problem anymore. You made your bed. Now you get to lie in it. They finally left our property that day, but unfortunately, it wasn't the end of their desperate attempts to worm their way back into our lives. Over the next few weeks, we kept hearing through various relatives that my mother had been forced to move in with her sister Eleanor. She was now sleeping on a couch because she couldn't afford to rent her own apartment anywhere, even the cheapest places in town. Brianna had ended up moving back in with her mother, so now you had two bitter, angry women stuck together in Eleanor's tiny apartment. Kevin's take on their new living situation was absolutely brutal and hilarious. So now Helen and Brianna are roommates? That's not a living arrangement, that's a punishment. Two narcissists sharing one bathroom, that's basically psychological warfare. The last update I received about their situation came from Aunt Eleanor herself, who called me directly one evening. She wanted me to know that my mother was desperately asking family members to try to convince me to forgive and forget everything that had happened. My mother was apparently going around to relatives, begging them to intervene on her behalf. "I wanted you to know that I told her bridges burned that badly don't just get rebuilt overnight," Eleanor said firmly. "You did the right thing, Tyler. Some people need to lose absolutely everything before they can understand what they actually had." About 6 months later, Mason asked me one evening while we were playing video games together, "Dad, why doesn't Grandma Helen visit us anymore like Grandpa Robert does?" I looked at my son. This happy, confident kid who was absolutely thriving under his Grandpa Robert's attention and love, and gave him the simplest, most honest answer I could think of. "Sometimes people make choices that really hurt other people, buddy," I explained gently. "When that happens, we have to protect ourselves and the people we love most." Mason nodded like that explanation made perfect sense to his 7-year-old mind, and then he went right back to his game without any further questions or concerns. That's when I knew with absolute certainty that I'd made the right decision for my family. My real family, Jessica, Mason, and Dad, were stronger, happier, and more secure without the constant toxic drama that Helen and Brianna brought into our lives. We didn't have to walk on eggshells anymore, wondering when the next explosion or manipulation would happen. Sometimes cutting people out of your life isn't about punishment or revenge. It's about protection and creating a healthy environment for the people who matter most. My mother and Brianna had learned the hard way that family isn't just a title you get to abuse and take advantage of. It's something you earn through love, respect, and consistently putting each other's well-being first. They had failed that test spectacularly, and now they were living with the natural consequences of their choices. As for me and my real family, I sleep better at night, knowing that my son will grow up understanding that he deserves to be treated with dignity and respect. He'll know that his father will always have his back and will never allow anyone, even family members, to treat him as less than he deserves. Mason is learning what healthy family relationships actually look like through watching how Jessica, Robert, and I treat each other with kindness, support, and genuine care. He's seeing that love isn't conditional on being convenient or meeting someone else's arbitrary standards. That's the legacy I want to leave him. The knowledge that he's worthy of unconditional love and that he should never accept anything less from the people in his life. My mother and Brianna chose their priorities, and they chose poorly. Now they get to live with those choices while watching from the outside as the rest of us build something beautiful together.